Well, they predicted another storm for this week. Weekend. The weekend. That's right. They predicted it. But as usual, weather forecasters are almost always wrong. Yeah, it's the only job I know where you could be wrong all the time and still have a job. But, being a meteorologist, it was kind of a job when I was young that I thought might be kind of neat, kind of fun. And then when somebody said what I just said years and years and years ago to me, oh, it's the only job you could be in and be wrong and still keep your job. That's job security. And I thought, well, you know what? That's not really job security. That's just being a schmuck and not being able to predict weather. So I didn't become a meteorologist. I thought, no, I don't think so. And then I wanted to be an astronaut. And that didn't happen because of eyesight. Eyesight got in the way. Back then, I don't know what it's like now, but, they wanted you to be a pilot from the Navy or the Air Force and, have certain vision. I think it had to be 2020 then. I don't remember now. Now I think it's acceptable to have a certain, variation or whatever. And back then I didn't think it was such a big deal to just, have glasses and then have some apparatus to keep them on your face, for like G-forces and whatever. I didn't think that it was could be a real deal, but probably is to an extent. But they have glasses now that practically just like you put them on and that's where they are, So they may allow those now. I don't know, but my whole idea was to use becoming a pilot in the Navy or the Air Force. The Navy would have been my top pick of those two. Top Gun and all, right? But nothing to do with the movie. Just Top Gun. But anyway, that would have been my pick. It's, to be a pilot in the military, that's the jumping off point to being an astronaut, And I know there's a lot of clowns out there in the world that say that the world's flat and everything, but people that have one foothold in reality, all know that, hey, the world is a globe. It's not flat. There's no way it could be flat. And it's been proven over and over. But yet their delusional minds don't want to, don't want to wrap around the earth as a globe for some reason. I don't know why. Well, I did a few outdoor videos here recently. I still got lots of snow on the ground out there. Every day, even if it is not above freezing, a tiny bit of snow surface leaves us because it leaves by the sun beating down on it and evaporation. Okay, it will evaporate over time to a point. Just super slow, but and wind helps that. Okay, so if it gets real windy, the only time you're not going to have any type of defrosting is somewhere like the tundra. The tundra, the ground is frozen all year round. That's why they call it the frozen tundra, because the ground is absolutely frozen all year round. And that's the reason why the trees can be very old but small, because they grow so slow, right? They grow so slow. Well, as you can see, I'm wearing my Cold Steel San My 3 Trailmaster today, just for fun. And I've got it on my drop-down dangler. I call that the Porta Dangler. I think that that's in the videos here somewhere. Anyway, I made a couple of them up extra for two of my viewers in Ohio. It so happens that they live within driving distance of each other, and since I don't remember what happened, through me they somehow made contact and they got together and did some camping and stuff, and they both got families, so that's fun stuff, right? Anyway, I had made up a couple of these Porta danglers, sent them out to them because I appreciate my viewers, and sometimes I just do stuff and I say, hey, you guys want one of these? Because, you know, they're like, hey, that's pretty cool, right? So I made a couple up and sent them out to them, told them strength test them. So one of the guys had his kids swinging off of it. He affixed it to something and he had him swinging off of the loop. So I guess my sewing's alright. Yeah. So why do I like this Cold Steel? I like all my knives, but I like the Cold Steel Trailmaster a great deal. I had always wanted one, and I went for another one, the Recon Scout, years ago because of practicality. You know, it wasn't too long, it wasn't too short, it had some heft. I could use it for jungle survival and things like that, right? So I went for that. So this one right here, I'd always kind of, you know, just wanted it, right, in the background. So eventually I thought, man, before the world ends and everything hits the fan, I'm going to get one of these. Then I looked and I looked, I finally found one, new old stock condition, that was out of the Ventura location, back when Lynn Thompson was heavy duty with, you know, Cold Steel. Okay, I got one, Ventura. This is Ventura vintage. Oh yeah. So, not the modern stuff. I have no idea whether any of the modern stuff is any good or not, whether it's all made in China or what, I have no idea. But when Lynn Thompson went away from Cold Steel, to me that was kind of like the divorce of me from Cold Steel. Not that I was heavy Cold Steel, because I never was, but there have been some things where I have been a very big supporter of Cold Steel, and that is their combat stuff. Okay, their combat knives, especially the Trailmaster and the Recon Scout. You know, I have heavily endorsed those knives over the years, and also, you know, like the shovel. Okay, the shovel. It's nothing beautiful like this, but it works. You know, it works, and I've got one Cold Steel shovel. I've had, they call it the Special Forces shovel or something like that. But I've had one for about 15 years. Never an issue. Has the same handle, and you know, you just got to be, with anything, you just got to use your head. You know, anything can break, anything can bend, anything can, you know, under the right circumstances. Okay, you got to use things for what they're meant for. You know, I see too many idiots online doing oh yeah, let's brake test this. You know, I mean, they're not wearing chainmail. Don't come crying to me when you've got a chunk of this sticking out of your rib cage. Okay, I'm not talking about this particular knife. I'm talking about a knife. I mean, people do stupid things, and a lot of people like to watch that, and they like to comment on those videos and say, wow, that was awesome, do it again. You know, this is the epitome of hold my beer. You know, it's the epitome of hold my beer. Don't do stupid stuff, guys. You're just going to get hurt. You're going to get hurt or you're going to get killed, okay? That kind of baloney, you know, nobody's going to give you a bunch of money for being dumb, okay? Matter of fact, you probably end up paying a bunch of money for being dumb for hospital fees. You're not like me where I, you know, sew my buddies up when they were being stupid. I usually got suture kits around, and they know it. Yeah, so one thing about the Trailmaster is I designated this as my cold weather combat knife. Okay, because in my Recon Scout is my hot weather combat knife. But the thing about these is that these are combat survival knives. Combat survival means that it's your primary use is combat, but you can also use it to survive. It will take anything that you've got for it in a survival situation. So, you know, I do have my dedicated survival knives, which I have a lot of fun with. But this is designed for penetration. And the thing I've had buoys in the past, and I swore off buoys after I broke the Buckmaster. So when I had the Buckmaster 184, it broke. Using it for what it was intended for. And I was digging for grubs in a log, in the base of a log, in a stump or something like that, and the tip broke off. All of a sudden I just felt like no resistance, and then I looked and the tip was gone. I was so ticked off. I swore off Bowie knives at that point for life. But Cold Steel made me a liar with their videos, their promotional videos showing, you know, the bending and the tip strength and everything on their buoys. I was a believer, and I'm still a believer in the original Cold Steel knives, right? I don't know anything about the new ones. But let me tell you, I dug in a lot of logs at the old Recon Scout. Yeah, dug in a lot of logs, did a lot of batoning and whatnot. Anything, everything I threw at that knife, it never flinched. And you can throw sparks off of them if you need to. Okay. Back then we used to have the magnesium bars with the little ferro rod on the side, and you just, you know, fire right up. Now in the jungle, because I have experienced in several different environments over the course of my life. I've been in many different environments. Believe it or not, the jungle is easier to survive than the Arctic, or a similar environment to the Arctic. Okay, because you have water, you have food. Those are things at hand, guys. You got water, you got food. You can build shelter. If you have one of these and you're in the jungle, you can do things. If you have one of these and you are in an area where there's no trees, for instance, like Greenland, you know, so what? You know, this is good for nothing basically, because there's nothing. It's the hardest environment, really. Well, not really. I would have to say that the sea, okay, being stranded at sea, lost at sea, and the Arctic, those are very, very difficult to survive situations. Okay, um, so if you were a soldier, no matter what kind of soldier, it doesn't matter. If you're in the Arctic, there are two things you're fighting. You're fighting the element of the Arctic, and you're fighting the enemy. Those are the two things that you're fighting. You're not just fighting against one thing. You cannot live with the Arctic unless you're someone like Inuit, okay? And then they don't have anybody shooting at them, okay? You see what I'm saying? So, um, the sea, if your boat went down or your ship went down at sea, and you're part of a group of survivors, you know, you can't drink the seawater. It's too much salt in there. The salinity is going to kill you. You know, people say, "Oh, it don't taste too bad." You know, you can't. You know, you want to, but you can't. You get thirsty. You want to drink it. You can't. You know, you could try to. You know, if you got a knife, you could try to spear fish. You know, if you're actually in the water though, yeah, that's a whole other story. You don't even have a raft, or you don't even have a lifeboat. Yeah, that's another story, man. There are so many different things with you know being a casualty, and then being at sea. You know, I've been to sea a lot of times, and I have run through my mind so many times what I would do if the vessel went down. And also in a chopper, I've been so many times, how will I survive this crash if this thing goes down? Looking around at the terrain, and, you know, always try to position my back towards the pilot, you know, in a chopper if I can. That's, you know, better to have that on your back and then impact with the nose end of the chopper, right? If it goes down and, yeah. But you never know how you're going to land. But get something to take your impact. You know, they have quick inflating life preservers, you know, with the little CO2 dealies. And you pull the string and boom, and it's inflated, you know. I always thought, well, I'll look around and grab a few of those, you know, and stick them behind my back, and, you know, and then inflate them all and brace for impact, you know. Yeah, man, we're running out of time. I'm just talking and talking, right? So, sitting here with this big old blade out. I don't particularly care for this sheath. Never have on these sheaths. You usually want to just make yourself a leather one or whatever. But, where's my coffee? Down here. Yeah. I don't know where I was going with all that. But the traveling in cold weather on snow, it depends on where you're at. If you're traveling in pretty level areas, got a lot of evergreen trees around you, spruce and whatnot. Okay. if you know where the waterways are and everything, you got topo map, you're aware of where you're at and where the water is and all that, you know, you could do pretty good. And if you have sled dogs to pull some of your kit, you know, you do pretty good. Even if you have sled dogs to pull you, you know, you got these special harnesses like I learned about over there in Norway, where, you know, you put this harness on, a couple dogs out in front, even one dog, you know, you got a lighter weight person, one dog, you know, is a helper, and you got cross country skis, Nordic skiing. You know, you're doing a little Nordic skiing, and then the dog kind of pulls you at the same time to help you. You got a rucksack on. You know, two dogs is better. Somebody like me who's little larger, right? Can use two dogs. Samoyed's a really good dog. A lot of people don't think much about Samoyeds, but to me, Samoyed is an excellent dog. And Akita. A lot of people do not think of Akitas as a working dog, as a sled dog, but an Akita makes a great sled dog. But every dog has to be trained. Some dogs are a little more hard-headed than others, you know. The difference between, say, a husky and an Akita is that husky's a great sled dog, but a terrible guard dog. Akita can be a great guard dog and a great sled dog, so they could be both. See, what else? What else could I throw out there for you to chew on today? Well, the other day I started that fire outside with fat wood, and I'm going to tell you, fat wood is awesome. I mean, you could carry a bit of birch bark in your bellows pocket on your trousers, you know, because you can flatten it out, and just have you a few sheets of birch bark in the pocket. But I tell you, fat wood is awesome because fat wood can last you so much longer than other fire starters, and it is waterproof. If I fell in a river or into a lake or in the ocean or anything, this fat wood is just fine because this is saturated with oils from the tree. So then when you go ahead and it scrapes some off, or, you know, feathers stick a bit off, and then cut that off, and you can start that and then start your fire so easily. And that's what you saw me do the other day. Now, because it was snowing, okay, what I would consider, anything I would consider an adverse condition where you definitely got to get the fire started and you're not just having a leisurely holiday, I would suggest that you have enough fat wood on hand that if you have to burn a chunk of fat wood to get everything else started. Now that may only mean like 1/3 of this little stick, okay? If I have 1/3 of this little stick here and I feather it up a little bit just to get it started with the fire steel, okay? Because you should always have a fire steel with you, okay? You always have a fire steel with you. There's many kinds, but this one is mine. So, always have a fire steel with you. Always have a means to strike the fire steel. If you have a fire steel with no striker like that one, you always have to have something to strike the fire steel. Now, my knife right here, this knife, and my Cold Steel Recon Scout, so the Trailmaster and the Recon Scout both have the ability to strike the fire steel with the with the spine of the knife, right? So if you got like 1/3 of this stick, that will get your fire going, okay? Now you should always have some tinder of some sort available to you that you never use unless it's an emergency. All right, and then you should have some tinder that you can use to start your fire. Okay, if you can, if you have the ability to gather tinder as you go, as you're going in someplace, and keep it in a warm, dry place, okay, without encumbering you or endangering your mission if you're on a mission, then do so, okay? But you should always have tinder on your person as well. On your person, in your pack, in your polk, okay? The 3 P's. Person, pack, polk, right? Okay. Person, pack, polk. That's the 3 P's. I'm not Michael Jackson. This is just the surviving glove of the two. I still gotta try to mess around with that other one. But, these gloves are great gloves. The thing that happened the other day was totally my fault. I say it's my fault. I would never have put these close to the stove like that. The wind probably blew the one off and it leaned against the stove, and that's how it started, catching fire. But the funny thing about that was the insulation was still intact. It did not do anything to the insulation at that point. Not saying that these are fireman's gloves, okay? Disclaimer. I'm just saying it didn't do anything to the insulation by that point. But these are Wells Lamett. Wells Lamett. Insulated. So these are, basically for winter, for clearing snow off your vehicle. But I like to use these for hot pots and stuff around the fire. They're not good for prolonged super hot stuff. Even welding gloves aren't. I've had welding gloves get really hot when stuff was super hot. When I was young, learning to weld in school, you learn real quick that stuff is not immune to heat if you've got enough of it. So, yeah. So make sure you always got a set of these around. And this is another thing. A lot of people neglect this. Now this is a masonry brush. Okay, you can get this at your local big box store where they sell a bunch of homeowner stuff. Okay. Now this is nice because it's bright yellow, right, for the winter environment. See that bright yellow? There it is. Whisking snow and ice off of your clothing. Okay, you want to do that. You want to have a tidy house going into your cabin tent. If you have a big cabin tent, you're up on a little expedition, hunting expedition, and you and your buddies set up a cabin tent, and everybody should think about having some kind of a whisk broom. It doesn't have to be this one. It could be just regular old whisk broom, but this one doesn't fall apart like the old straw ones over a lot of use. It is a bit heavy, but if one of your party, now everybody has to talk with each other before you go on your trip, right? Because this is how things get lost and forgotten. Like in the movie, Stand By Me. Nobody brought any food? Yeah. What? You didn't bring the food? This was your idea. I can't think of everything. I brought the comb. You know what I'm saying? So, guys go on a little trip. You need to make sure everybody thought of the right stuff, or has they got their own food and that sort of stuff, right? Anyway, So a whisk broom, you know, I grew up with the whisk broom. You know, when I was a kid, it'd snow, and before we came into the house, Mom would walk outside with her broom, and she'd broom us all off, and then we would come inside. You know, you can broom off your mucklucks or your pack boots or whatnot, and then go into the house. Okay, and she always kept the landing clear on the stairs to the house. She would keep that area clear, and then she'd clean you off, and then you'd go in, and she'd clear off the landing again, and she'd go back in. Okay, so in this case, put this in your pulk. You know, put a lanyard so it doesn't go anywhere. Put this in your pulk. You know, and then you can use it on your pulk. You can use it on you. You know, you can use it before you go in your tent. If you have a hot tent, you know, you can use it before you go in your hot tent. You could use it on firewood if you want to brush snow off of firewood that you've stowed outside. Okay, you know, your imagination. You know, remember Miracle on 34th Street? Well, you've heard of this and that. Have you ever heard of the imagination? You know, you could go on daily trips to China. You know, you can pretend you're driving a bus down Fifth Avenue, blah, blah, blah. You know, the Santa Claus guy, so. I always brush everything off before I come into the house. So these are mucklucks. Modern mucklucks, you know. People say, those are not mucklucks, those are not really mucklucks because they are blah, blah, blah. That's like somebody told me one time, your knife is not really a kukri because it wasn't made by Nepalese people. Okay. Clear that saliva off of your, you know, the corner of your mouth, dude. Anyway, these are mucklucks. These are modern mucklucks made by Neos and Vibram soles there. These soles are supposed to be somewhat self-cleaning, and I've never had a problem with them getting overly clogged to where they wouldn't just come unclogged right away. They are completely watertight, okay, up to a certain point here. And then that's just a snow gator on the top. You can roll that down if you want, but I never do because it's not necessary. It's just a lot of activity you don't need to engage in. All right. Now, I'm thinking that this is like 800 denier or 600 denier, something like that. But it's still material. So, is this still completely waterproof? I cannot tell you. I have to take this liner out and do the sunlight test through it, and then I would know, right? You look inside, sunlight comes through, oh, there's a hole. Yeah. I don't use these a lot. Okay, as you can see, there is that's the waterproof limit there. All right. I want my feet warm, and the snow's deep. That's what I'm putting on. These are these are Baffin brand liners. Now these are the Antarctic liners. So these used with some boots, like, you know, like in this particular type of form where these are kept dry from the elements. They say that you can be in weather to minus, I think, minus 138 if you are active and moving and doing stuff. In other words, you would be in Antarctica. It would be probably a snowstorm where you were holding onto a rope between buildings, and you were actively walking between the buildings. That's what I would consider. That's what I would be considering these to be good for minus 138. Not sitting around having a chat, you know, outside in the middle of a blizzard in Antarctica. Not sitting around. So, polar proven. And yes, Baffin has been used on polar expeditions, both North and South Pole. So, and then these have these wool felt liners that I bought these, and then I cut them to size and I put them in. Okay, so it's a wool felt. Now, if you there are some Canadian models of this, if you can find them, that they have tiny little holes in the bottom, and what those are for is for collecting moisture. And then when you get done being outside, you go in and you take the liners out of your mucklucks, and you take out the bottom piece there, and you smack it, and after you let it sit outside for a few minutes, you put it outside, and you let that moisture in there freeze, and then you bring it back in, and you smack it, and all the ice that formed comes out. Right. You want like a snow room for that, mud room. All right, come back in another one.